Thanks for calling ABC Credit Union.
I just want to talk to a person.
For customer service, please press 1.
Talk to a person.
For locations and hours, please press 2.
Talk to a person.
To speak to an agent at any time during this call, please press 0 or stay on the line.
Welcome to CX Without the BS. Now, here are your hosts, Tom Milligan and Brian Nichols.
Welcome to another episode of CX Without the BS. I am one of your hosts, Brian Nichols.
And I'm the other host, Tom Milligan.
Tom, thanks for joining us today. I'm really looking forward to digging into, I dare say, one of the more interesting conversations we've had here on CX Without the BS with a great storyteller, Andrea Sampson. But before we dig into that, Tom, how you been? What's new?
You know, I'm looking forward to this. I've never met her before today, so it's pretty exciting. But before we get into it, you and I have just spent a week or so traveling.
Yep. Good old Nashville.
We were at a trade show. It's the first time you and I have ever worked a trade show together. And I got to tell you, my friend, that was a lot of fun. And
we figured it out. We got a good vibe going on.
Sure. And you know, we saw a lot of people that have followed the show, so it's always exciting to run into people that know what we're doing here.
What do you say, 1,000 of our closest friends?
Yes, exactly. I mean, yeah, always fun to hang out with 1,000 of your closest friends. The other thing is that we're both headed out to Salt Lake.
Yes.
For another 2 or 3 days of training.
Yep.
And then I'm heading to Raleigh right after that for a weekend to see some friends. And then I'm headed right back out to Utah right after that. So, I mean, I'm traveling more literally in the next 30 days than I have in the 10 months since I started at Sharpen. So that's what I've got going on.
You're working with Trip then from our last episode to make sure you're getting those Delta reward miles all stacked up. Is that what's going on?
Right. I need to call his dad and make sure he takes care of us. Yeah,
as long as you're not flying Frontier, Tom.
Oh, that will never happen.
If you're curious, by the way, folks, what we're referencing here, go back to last week's episode with Trip Robinson. We dug into a lot of interesting travel stories. So go ahead and listen to that. And by the way, Tom, speaking of stories, I think we have a good conversation in store for today, talking just about that, stories, and specifically what stories from a CX perspective are you as a company telling, and what are the stories your customers expecting, right? And I'm really excited. So I talked to Andrea back. I have another podcast I do, and we were talking about storytelling as it pertains more to the corporate news that we see right now and how, like, what's real, what's not, and how can they help reclaim trust. And then as we're talking, just stuff about like day jobs and stuff popped up, and she mentioned she was in the CX space. And I was like, really? Oh, I kind of am in that space too. And we start chatting afterwards, and lo and behold, she's got a wealth of experience in our world. So I said, hey, Andrea, do you want to come on to another podcast after you wrapped up with me here today? And she said, absolutely. I would love to do that because this is my world. So I think what we're going to find today, Tom, is how to not just tell stories, but tell stories that help paint a vision, right? Like that actually show the why behind why we do this. Or it's the Bills from Office Space, what would you say you do here? You're going to find out what you do here as a company. So yeah, I'm really excited for you to meet Andrea. She's awesome. All right, Tom, on to the show. Andrea Sampson here on CX Without the BS. Andrea Sampson from Talk Boutique. Welcome to the show. How are you?
Thanks, Brian. I'm great, and I'm really excited to be here with you guys.
We're very excited to have you on the show. I know you and I, we've connected on different shows, and I started talking to you more, learned that you found yourself in this customer experience world for quite a while, and I thought you'd be a great person to pick your brain on CX Without the BS. So I said, Tom, we got to have Andrea on the show, and he said, absolutely. So Andrea, help prove that I was right in inviting you on the show. Give us a little bit of your story and your role when you were working in the customer experience space.
Yeah, so I spent a lot of my career in marketing and advertising, and actually, just as I was getting into that world, I had been in fundraising. So I was a fundraiser working for health charities, and as I went to leave charities, interestingly enough, back in those days, no one would hire me because I thought I had no experience because they thought I was a volunteer and not paid staff. But I ended up working in a contract call center as a client service manager, and this was in the sort of early days of direct marketing, of deregulation of many industries, and we were on the cutting edge. We were bringing technology into the world, and we were understanding what it meant to be a contract call center, working on some of the largest brands in the world at the time, and launching products, very, very quickly, as you do in these call center environments. I left that and then went into advertising, and through that world ended up working on many, many different brands, where we would look holistically at the communications that we were doing with our clients or for their customers, and specifically at the customer experience, because a big part of advertising is understanding the customer journey. And so you're looking across every touch point and saying, where is there a fail point or where is there a success point that we want to address? And so did lots and lots of work. And now as a CEO and founder of a company, believe me, customer's experience is something I think about a lot.
Andrea, first off, great to meet you. I'm a big fan from everything that Brian's told me. And so, and a second thing is congratulations on kind of graduating, I guess. You went into contract call center world and then you moved into advertising and everything. So tell us what you're at Talk Boutique now. I don't know a lot about that. Tell us, what is it?
So Talk Boutique is a speaker development, speaker representation company working with thought leaders and experts. And what we do, I got to this world, which seems really different from where I was in advertising, but I got to this world through, by way of TED. I spent a fair amount of time in the TED world as a speaker's coach, volunteering, because all TEDx events are volunteer driven. And it gave me the opportunity to jump into a new career. I always like to say I got to a point in my ad world, I was a senior vice president of strategy, doing really, really well, loved that world. But at some point I realized I was an idealist in a capitalist world, and it was time for me to make a change. And so hence the volunteering work and then moving into what I do now. But I mean, I work with, some of the smartest people in the world on, activities that are changing our world. And we often work with corporate clients where we're doing cohort-based programs where we've got a lot of touch points, because we actually do TED-style events inside of organizations. And if you've ever done event management, you know that customer experience is absolutely essential.
Yeah.
One of the things, Andrea, back when you and I last connected, and we talked about this with your coaching at Talk Boutique, and that a lot of helping create memorable experiences is helping create memorable stories.
Yes.
So help maybe paint the picture for folks how we can take storytelling and bring that into the customer experience world to create an experience that then the customer themselves can go out and tell that story based on what they saw firsthand.
That's a great question, Brian. And I'll actually talk about events first, because, in my world, we do a lot of events. And one of the things that we work on, we work as curators for events. And what that means is we do the entire stage lineup of any large speaking or conference type event. And the first thing that I do as I come into that environment is to look at the entire event and say, first of all, what is it that this event represents to those who are going to that event? So, is this just a conference for people to network, or is there a message that is that the company that's putting this on wants to get across? And usually there's some sort of a message, whether it be, a yearly motivational type of an event, or whether it be something more inspirational like a TED event. And so from that, what we do is we establish sort of a core message that we want that event to get across to everybody. So when we look at every touch point that the customer is going to come into, or participants are going to actually come into contact with, we want that story in some way to live, or that idea. And that means that we've got to create the event story. And then what we're doing is we're creating a story from the stage. So every person that's going to be on that stage is going to be conveying a part of that story, which is holding the idea that the event represents. And that's really important because, I mean, we've all gone to events where it just felt like a bit of a mixed bag. And we came away with, oh, well, that speaker was good, or that program was good, or that workshop was good. But, I don't know, I don't feel like I really got a lot from the event. And that's what you want to avoid. And that's why storytelling is so important, because it allows you to create a container, whether it's an event or whether it's, a daily interaction with your customers. When you're building a story around an overarching idea. And when we look at customer experience, the overarching idea often is either the mission or the vision of the organization underpinned by the values of that organization. Then the story helps you to be consistent to those things. It helps you to connect with your day-to-day contacts in a different way, because now you're not just solving a problem or addressing something that needs to get done, a process. What you're actually doing is contributing to an overall story. And that really helps to connect employees as well. Now they feel like they're part of something bigger. Now, it's a bit different than a vision, because a vision is something you're achieving, where a story is something you're living.
Okay.
So that's all. That is, I mean, that's a lot, Andrea.
Yeah.
That is a lot. So I want to make sure I understand, and so that the listeners understand as well. So Talk Boutique is, you teach people how to be better speakers, but it also sounds like you do all sorts of just TED type events, but also full on event planning. And I mean, what's the elevator pitch?
Yeah, so we don't do event planning, we do event curation. So we're the behind the scenes people. We work with the speakers, we work with the programmers, and what we're doing is working out that behind the scenes. So our elevator pitch actually is that we take experts and change makers and transform them into thought leaders by helping them to become storytellers, amplifying their voices and creating values-based brands so that they can create the impact that they want to make. And so we're always coming through the lens of thought leaders or thought leadership. And why is that important in our world? Well, because thought leaders are who are co-creating our future. And when we think that thought leadership is outside of ourselves, well, what we're doing is we're not being part of that future. So we need more and more diverse thought leaders in the world. So much of the work we're doing is about creating those very things.
Got it.
So let's take that a step forward too, because you mentioned helping create the thought leaders, and let's kind of go to the actual business side of things. And you create the thought leaders, you create the vision. Let's bring them together. When you create the vision, what does that empower the thought leaders to do when they're directly interfacing with the customers?
Yeah. So, I mean, we call it a core idea, like your core thought leadership idea. What do you stand for in the world? What is and it really is comprised of a topic, your unique value to that topic, and then a why. What is it that drives you and motivates you? And what that does is that gives the thought leader purpose, right? So they now have a sense of who they are and why they show up. And so when they're interacting with a customer, that allows them to bring it to the lens of impact, right? So at the end of the day, especially at thought leadership, we all want to create a little bit of impact in this world, whether it's in our communities or whether it's with our families or whether it's, on the world as a whole. And so when we have a core idea, it allows us to start with the why we do what we do. What's the impact that we're making in this world? And because of that, then it allows us to be open, to be curious, to interact with much more humility. It's not about me being right. It's about me learning. And that's what thought leaders do really, really well, is that they're, and this is often what I see the difference between an expert and a change and a thought leader, because experts come in with lots of knowledge, but without often the openness to look beyond what they already know. They're more interested often in giving you that information, data, facts, all that sort of knowledge, versus a thought leader comes in with the same amount of knowledge, but with an openness, because what they're doing is they're building story around that data and facts and allowing for others to interact with it in ways that neither could have known which then they're curious about, right? So curiosity is such a big factor within thought leadership.
The question, right, Tom, the get me interested, pique my interest. I want you to tell me more. That's yeah, exactly. We were just talking about that
Absolutely.
earlier.
Yep. So we based. I'm thinking about, you just talked about why we do things, and I remember years ago I went to a show. It was an internal company, a kickoff or some sort of a QBR or something like that, and they the theme was find your why, and it was based on
Right.
a Simon Sinek
Absolutely.
TED talk, and I think I remember one of the things that they said was, peel back the onion and ask the question why 5 times, and you can generally get to the core reason as why you're doing something. So
Absolutely. That's the Socratic method, right? Of like questioning, right? So when you keep asking those whys, what it does is you get to that point where you find the deep answer inside of yourself. And it's really interesting. I mean, that we use that a lot in our coaching methodology, because it does help you to dig deep and find what it is driving that person. And it's interesting because often it'll start off as being something that's very obvious. Well, I want my information to get out into the world. And then, well, I want to make money to get that information out in the world. Well, and as you dig deeper and deeper, you start to find that there's, I remember actually working with one scientist. He was a roboticist and very, very facts driven. And, as we went through that why statement, he finally got down to, well, because I want humans to be creative. I want us to have the space and the time to be creative. And I think it was even a surprise to him to even say it out loud, because he was doing all this work in very technical means, and creating what are called service robots. And in the end, he wanted to free humanity from what he called the dull, the dirty, and the dangerous, so we could be creative.
I love the fact too, Andrea, about being able to have a company story that you're saying, and you explain the why, but let's go into the how, because I think a lot of companies, they hear this and they say, this all sounds great. Where do I start? Now, beyond reaching out to you and saying, Andrea, come help us, let's give some basics that companies could start doing today to start seeing returns on not just getting a strong company story, a strong company vision, but actually bringing that to the customers so they can see that as well.
Yeah, it's a great, great provocation, because here's the thing, like the what and the why are the things that really define who that company is. The why, of course, is important because it's that impact piece, but often it's the piece that everybody thinks is so obvious, right? Because it is often helping. Now, it's not as obvious as we think it is, because we're thinking those thoughts. So as a company, they do need to state that why, and it's really important. But the what and the how are really key to getting out there and actually doing the work and building that story. So the what, first of all, any company, the first thing they should be doing is going, what is the topic or the industry or the area of expertise that we address most? We think of industries in terms of very mass statements like, oh, that's in telco, or that's banking or finance or insurance. But if you get a little more specific on your what, so maybe it's values-based insurance, that would be a what. You can see how that narrows the industry down just a little bit, or it defines you a little bit. Then the how. Now the how is what you're uniquely bringing to that what to activate it in a way that no one else can. That how is a combination of the background that allows you to be able to work in that industry or that what. So what is it that gives you the expertise? How is also what you've learned along the way that's unique only to you. That. So as a company, what are those unique processes or things that you do that's different from anyone else? And you can find it in a way that it comes into large statements. So maybe if you're a values-based insurance company, we start with our customer and understand what's important with them, so that we can create products that not only meet their needs today, but the needs that they're going to have in the future. That's probably a pretty standard line, but you can imagine how you could get more and more and more refined on that as a company as you refine who you are. So that what and that how starts to be the things you stand for. Now, what's the story you build around it? What type of a story are you building? We can go into story archetypes, like, think of Hollywood movies. Are you like, Lord of the Rings, where it is a quest. You're taking, you as a company are solving a problem, and it's a quest to get the ring to melt it down. Or are you on a journey and return, like think Back to the Future, where you're going into the future and you're pulling information that you couldn't have had and you're bringing it back to today. And so some companies do that, right? We see many companies actually making these promises. We can see where you're going. Are you, like Star Wars, overcoming the monster? So there's a big bad thing out there that's hurting you, and so we're going to protect you from that. We're going to give you what you need. So when companies can find their archetype, their what and their how and their why, what they've got is an idea that lives inside of a story, and a story archetype that they can build about who they are. So now, and what we do when we're working with companies on this very thing, because we do something called story finding with organizations, what we do is we then build out a manifesto. It's the story. It's the story of the organization told through the lens of that archetype. And so the language, even the values, like all of the elements throughout are following that archetype. So now employees can go, oh, I know where I fit into this. I'm like Luke Skywalker, or I'm like whoever, and they can start to find their place. So if you're in customer experience, well, that your job now is, if you're overcoming the monster, then so much of your job in customer experience is about looking forward at what are the threats and solving those for the customer before they appear. And so it gives the employees a way to show up with a structure that actually they can really align to. So it's not so nebulous.
Wow. There's a lot there, Tom. Where do you want to start?
Well, first off, thank you for the Star Wars references. Brian and I are both huge Star Wars fans.
Which one are you, Tom? Are you Chewbacca? Are you Luke? Are you Han Solo in this story?
Actually, as soon as we started talking about Star Wars, I started wondering who the Darth Vader and the Emperor are in our story.
Ooh, that's a good question too.
Well, those could be some of your competitors, right?
Okay, that's the nice way of thinking about it. But no, so no, that it really is, that it is an interesting way to look at it. And I think I can totally envision how that would I mean, I'm thinking about, of course, Brian and I work at Sharpen, and of course I'm internalizing and thinking, okay, so if we were to write our archetype, what are we? And I honestly, I have to spend some time thinking about it. And it's a fascinating thought. How long does a process like that generally take? If Sharpen were to hire you and Talk Boutique, what's the time frame? What's the process?
Yeah. So the way that it works, it's a really fun program. And it comes out of my days as a branding expert, and it's not a branding exercise, but it leans on my experience and my expertise as a branding expert. So what we do is we start off with doing some base research. So we actually do stakeholder interviews. We go out to the marketplace. We find out what the market thinks of you as a company. We go internally to key employees and find out what they think about you. And we'll even talk to customers and ex-customers. So we kind of get a 360 view of who you are. And that typically takes about 5 to 6 weeks, just because it's, people's schedules and things like that. And what we're doing with all of that, we create what's called a discovery review. We're also looking at, competitive environment, all of that. So we do a pretty good 360 review, and we come in with some provocations to what we call a story finding day. So it's a 1-day process where we get about 20 key people from the company in the room. And we go through a series of facilitated exercises where we're slowly sort of breaking down barriers to find this story. So we're looking through the lens of, first of all, the research we've done and what have we come up with. We then look at who is the customer and what do they expect of us? Are there different groups? Then we're looking through the lens of the market and what's changing. And then from that, we start going into the idea creation. What is the idea we want to get out there? And then from that idea, then, okay, now what's the archetype that can hold it? So we come out of that 1-day session with all of the building blocks of the story. And then we go away and we start to formulate from all of that a story and an archetype for you. We come back with what we call platforms. So you're hearing it said, you're not seeing it in its final form, but we're giving you different ways in which it could be said. And then from that, we then go, you choose one direction, and then we go into a full-on story. And so that will take, by the end of it, it's about an 8-week process.
Oh, wow.
But we've rewritten by that point everything from your vision to your mission, to like rewritten it language wise. We haven't changed it. We've changed the language, because now the language matters, right? Because a language is, words matter. They're what people align to. And so, often we see visions and missions and even values written in corporate speak that no one really associates to. Whereas we take it into a story, and each piece is now coming into a story. And it's where we find that program really helpful actually is in the customer experience space. Because, like I think back to my days in advertising, and one of the things that we used to get asked a lot was, can you come in and train our customer service reps so that they understand our brand? And the challenge with that was, you've got to go so deep. You got to get into the scripting. You've got to get into the scenarios, right? And so when we're doing it in this way, what it's doing is you're giving them an overarching theme. And so now your managers can do that work. It's not some consultant outside of the company that doesn't understand the day-to-day, because it's story. And as humans, we're so hardwired, there's brain science behind story. We are hardwired for story. So when you engage, and a lot of times these managers will be in that 20-person workshop, they're part of building it. So when they're taking it to their team, they're proud of it. It's not somebody else gave it to them. They built it.
What kind of measurable difference? I mean, this sounds cool. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm a storyteller. People make fun of me all the time. Brian's laughing because everything I do starts with a story. And sometimes I need to go to a class to stop telling stories. But
They're always fun, Tom. Come on.
Hey, this really resonates with me, so I love it. But do you have measurable results that you could say, this company did this and therefore this happened?
Well, the measurable results on this one are really about employee engagement, right? This is really about people coming together, understanding the organization. Like we did this with a media company about 2 years ago. They were in the process of developing out. They've been around forever. So this is a company that had lots and lots and lots of experience in the market. The problem was that the way in which that they do media is very different from anyone else, and they couldn't describe it. And so everybody had a different way, because the process was unique, and the value proposition against that process was unique depending on the way you looked at it. And so what we had to do was help them find one way. Now, in that particular instance, what the work we did together did for them was it helped their salespeople to be able to sell better. It helped individually within the different divisions to understand each other and their overlap better. And then it helped them actually to be able to deliver better, because as soon as we gave them that idea, and in this case, it was it's like, I'm trying to remember how we termed it, but I think it was like a marketplace. That's what they had. They were using a marketplace approach. So imagine, instead of being media buyers, you're actually using media as an investment tool. So and so we found, because often when you're telling stories are metaphoric in nature. And so when you can find the right metaphor, what it does immediately is it shortcuts every conversation.
Right.
And so that's what we did for them, right? So we found that. So it impacted every part of their business. Now, can I say they increased sales by 20%? I don't know, maybe. I actually have no idea. We did it with another company that so they live inside of a large university, but they actually are their own organization inside of this university. So basically, one of the profs inside spun off a company that is university owned, but that actually administers very, very large grants from the government. And that administration is it's in the area of employment. And they've brought together employment services companies, job seekers, and employers, and they are the hub spot in the middle of all three of those. But they could never, just because they've literally got 4 different audiences, because the government, of course, is one of their audiences as well. And inside the organization, they actually couldn't describe who they were at all. And so even selling products, it was like they were developing products, but every time they developed a product, it would kind of go off to one side or another, and they could never find the linkages between all of it. And so when we went through the story finding program, they became, we called them it was a digital community workforce system. And those 4 words together gave them an identity for the very first time, and gave them the ability to be able to sell. And what it did is also defined their audiences, so they knew where their primary audiences were, and how, like, as an example, the government fell away as an audience. Although it's an important part of their business, they report to the government because they administer funds, but they don't market to the government. And so they became a partner to the government, as opposed to the government being one of their audiences. So it helps with definition as well.
That's so fascinating. And one of the things, Andrea, I wanted to circle back to is just this idea of having a cohesive story that not just like your sales team can promote when they're trying to secure new business, but I just want to go back to that customer experience from, then let's just use like an agent perspective, because Elephant in the Room, our podcast, we talk to a lot of folks in the CX industry, usually like the end providers of the technology. I think you and I talked about that last time, but like one of the just ugly realities of our industry is that 9 times out of 10, when a customer is calling one of our customers, usually it's because something's wrong, right? There's something happened, probably wasn't the best of scenarios. So a customer's calling in more often than not with a little aggravation. So how can a frontline CX person be able to address that concern that a customer has right now, while still being able to tell that story and make sure that the story not just is told, but that the person who has the complaint, the customer that has the complaint, not only feels that their issue is dealt with, but they themselves are now understanding how their role as a customer and what the customer experience person did to help tie that story together.
Yeah. So let's start with that customer. That customer is calling in a state of some form of crisis, right? Like that, when something goes wrong, there's a form of crisis at work. And the reality is it's a story. They've got a story at play, right? So they're calling in with a story. And if the customer agent on the other end of the phone is listening with the lens of, okay, I'm going to hear this customer's story. And as I'm listening to it, there are indicators that customer is going to be giving within that story as to what's really important. We know this, right? They're going to repeat things. They're going to, there's going to be a tone of voice. There's going to be, different gesticulations, whether it be physical, if they're looking at them, or even vocal or breathing. So the story is going to be augmented. So when we're listening to a problem, if we start off thinking, okay, this is a story that this customer has that is very real. It is a real story. And so you start with that. Now we start to go, okay, so now what's the story that I'm representing? What is it, the story that I want them to now feel like they are held. Their story can now meet my story in a way that the problem that they have will be solved. So they need to
Mhm.
feel like I'm, as the customer service person, is listening. So that's really important. Secondly, able to expertly solve that because I'm part of something bigger than me. It's not just me. And that's what the story does, right? So I'm not solving your problem. We're solving your problem because we stand for this, whatever the story is. So if this customer is coming in with a story of being let down and betrayed by the organization, let's say, because that's how often they feel, right? So something went wrong. You told me this wouldn't happen, and it did happen. And so now I am disappointed in you and I feel betrayed. You lied to me. And so the customer service agent on the other end, if let's say that your a company whose archetype is overcoming the monster, right? So now if we think about that, well, when you're overcoming a monster, there are a lot of twists and turns in that, right? And so, now we go, oh gosh, I'm so sorry. Now my job is to find out, where did this happen? We need to, like, this is a bigger problem. Wow. Okay. Let me hear more of what's happening, because we've got to get our best team on this. We've got to make sure that this, isn't happening for anyone else. And so now your job, you are out in the wilderness with that customer now in their story, but through the lens of, I'm going to solve this not just for you, but for everybody else who's coming after you, because we know that this is, the force is with us, and we've got to make sure it's going beyond this one thing. And so that customer service rep is now very empowered because they're not alone. They're feeling like they're part of a team, even though they're there alone. It's customer service rep to customer who's in crisis. The story is what's giving them the feeling of something bigger. And, it's importantly in those moments, though, that there be reminders for that customer service rep. It can't just be, hey, I hope you remember this. What are the things that are around that customer service rep that reminds that person that they're part of something bigger? Have you created some sort of company swag that has, something on it that's a reminder? Do they have a desktop, a desktop saver that is telling them about that? Is there something, that they they have a coffee mug? I don't know. Whatever it is, there needs to be reminders for them that they value, because if you're giving them swag that it's like, whatever, they're never going to use it. But it's when you give them something that they feel like they were a part of, that they really, really value. And in those moments, I think one's coming out right now.
Yep.
So I got this. It's a dial soap for
Yep.
folks who are playing along in the home game. My old company I used to work at, Stratus IP, we have a guy called Uncle Lou. He's from one of the partners that we work with. And whenever a new sales guy would get hired, he would always bring in a bar of soap. And the point behind the bar of soap was to remind you that and at the time we were just selling like phones and internet, that there is nothing different between phones and internet as there is selling a bar of soap. It's a commodity. People are going to use it no matter what. So you are the differentiator, not the bar of soap. And I've had this for well over a decade, even though it's just a little bag of dial soap. But it means something to me. I look at it and I say, yes, you're just selling a commodity. You are the differentiator. So yeah, you're spot on. Like this means more to me. Like if this went missing, my heart would go broke. Like I would be so sad. So you're spot on, Andrea.
Brian, two things. Number one, I suggest you use it, and number two, you can buy another. But
don't tell Lou though. Don't tell Lou.
Andrea, I'm listening to your story, and all I can think, Brian often uses the phrase when people are not quite aligned. He says, "Same church, different pew." But it sounds like what we're talking is, same church, same pew, and the other euphemism, of course, is we're all going to be singing from the same sheet of music. And it doesn't mean we're all saying the exact same thing at the exact same time. It's a harmonious choir is what you're creating.
Yeah.
With
That's it.
story.
And what I think is really beautiful about that analogy, and again, this is, analogies are so powerful. If we think about an orchestra as an example,
Mhm.
every musical instrument is important in that orchestra. They all have a role to play, and they play their role at different times and in different intensities and with different frequencies. And that's really important, because that's, for us in the audience, when we listen to that orchestra, it all comes together and it sounds beautiful and easy, and that's what we want it to sound like. We want that music to feel like it just organically happened and everybody knew what they were doing. And it's the same inside of an organization. Every person is one of those musical instruments, and every person has a role to play. And if you're the triangle, you might only play once or twice throughout, but when you play, it's really important.
Right.
And by the way, I just want to piggyback on that musical analogy because I'm a big music nerd. I played tuba for like 15 years. So it's amazing. Like I want, yes, when it all comes together, the harmony and how it all fits, but also pay attention to when one of those pieces goes away, right? Like if you remove the vocal tracks, all of a sudden, all you hear is the music. You're like, something's missing. Or you remove the tuba, and all of a sudden that bass line's gone. Or you remove that triangle, right? Or in the Christmas song "Sleigh Ride," that whip slash. Then what if that goes away and everybody's waiting for it? You know it's supposed to be there, and that just speaks to, like, even though if you don't know the company story, you can feel something missing when it is missing, because it's not all coming together. It doesn't sound pretty. It doesn't have that pretty harmony that's layered therein. So not just adding together, but also when you take a piece away.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that is. And I think that's such an important message, because, this is a similar message that I talk to, like, about people seeing themselves as thought leaders. Because a lot of what I talk about is that we are all thought leaders on some level. And it's exactly that. Like, we are adding our voices to a bigger whole. And when we don't add our voice, what's missing? And we, when we look out in our world, we want more inclusivity, we want more sustainability, because that equals resilience. And it's the same inside of a company. Every person inside of a company is creating resilience within the organization in some way. But take away one of those voices, you erode that resilience.
All right.
Perfectly said.
Tom, shall we? The most fun part of the show?
Yes.
All you. I'll let you fire away today.
All right. So, Andrea, you know that the last question we ask every guest is the very simple one. You've been in this business for a while, from early advertising days to contact centers to now teaching people how to tell the right story. So you've seen a lot. What is the biggest pile of bullshit that you have seen in the CX space across the years?
Oh, look, I think the thing that has, and it continues to bother me. So when I worked in advertising, I would work with organizations on their brands and on their brand promises. And we would spend, they would spend lots and lots of money, and we would spend lots and lots of time developing out these promises that we would make to the customer. And we would, go out in advertising and in campaigns, telling the customer, this is what we stand for as an organization. And yet they would not spend the same amount of time and money internally training and creating systems that supported the promise that they were taking out. So it was an empty promise. Right. And it's the thing that would bother me the most. And it still bothers me. Like, I'll get calls from companies every now and then, like we all get those bloody telemarketing calls. We all hate them, or we'll get the inbound email. And, you start talking to that person, and it's pretty clear that they know nothing about you, that they actually don't know about the company's products. And that the thing that is most promised by that company is not being able to be fulfilled. And because I know a little bit, I tend to be that annoying person on the other end who quizzes them on these things and then eventually gets pissed off with them, because I'm like, you have no idea. Like, you have no idea. This is what your competitor is doing. This is what, and here you are telling me you're going to help me. So if you're going to be in customer service, and you're going to be representing the promise that a company is making, know what that promise is.
Mhm.
And as a company, if you are making those promises, make sure you are training your staff and you're paying them accordingly to represent that promise. Because that is, I think, the thing that we see so often is that, unfortunately, that customer service piece is seen as an afterthought and not as the probably one of the most important things that it absolutely is inside of any company.
Absolutely true. Yeah. And by the way, in addition to paying them and training them, empowering them.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Give them the tools, give them the latitude, and the ability to make decisions, on the customer's behalf. I mean, when something goes wrong, a customer will always appreciate some form of a token that says we were wrong. And whether that's a credit on their bill or whether that's a coffee cup, or like, it doesn't actually matter. Just give that person the authority to do that and to make that decision.
I think it's fascinating, Brian, that we had a guest 2 weeks ago, I believe, Fred Stacy was on, and he got his start as a contact center person, and he's moved around and done a whole bunch of stuff, and he had very similar thoughts towards the end of the show. It's about we talk about CX almost as a technology industry, but CX is an overall experience. And so you and he, both with that contact center background, went to go to the front line where
Yeah.
the people are talking to the customer and give them what they need to do it right.
Absolutely. It's a human to human business. Like, yes, technology is the interface, of course, because that's the world we live in. It is an interface, but it is nothing more than that. It is a tool. And so you always have to look at the humans who are running the tool. We're not yet look, there is no technology yet passing the Turing test. And
Right.
so, and to be honest, even when it does, I'm not sure that that's going to be the right solution for the humans who need the support.
Yeah. There are plenty of humans that are tools too. So
Well, that's a whole other conversation.
So we talk about iceberg selling, right? You get the tip of the iceberg. There's more beneath the surface. I think this is iceberg podcasting because this is just the tip of storytelling, creating great customer experiences. So to the audience who wants to see what else be underneath the surface of the water for iceberg podcasting we have left, I want them to go ahead and make sure they follow you, Andrea. I know you're big on LinkedIn, so give us some deets. Where can folks go ahead, find you, continue the conversation? And hey, if they want to reach out to you and Talk Boutique to help improve their CX story, where should they go ahead and do that?
Yeah. So follow me on LinkedIn. I do lots of work on LinkedIn. I have a YouTube channel called the Thought Leader Academy, and I put out videos twice a week. And of course, go to our website, talkboutique.com. We've got lots of products, lots of ways you can book a meeting with me if you want to meet with me directly. Always happy to sit down and chat and, find out a little bit more about you. I think as storytellers, we love hearing new stories. So would love to meet you.
Here. Andrea, thank you for joining us. I know Tom and I are going to wrap things up here and bring this home, but we've really appreciated the conversation. And frankly, to your point, this whole conversation started because you and I had a conversation. Yeah. And I think we both said, ooh, there's more here that we have to unpack. So I view this as part, I guess, 2 for me, part 1 for CX Without the BS of a much longer conversation we're going to keep having. So Andrea Sampson from Talk Boutique, thanks for joining CX Without the BS.
Thanks so much, Brian and Tom. This has been an absolute pleasure. I've enjoyed every moment.
Thanks, Andrea.
Likewise. Thanks. All right, Tom, that's going to wrap up our conversation with Andrea. I told you we had a fun conversation in store, eh?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll tell you what, I just went and followed her on LinkedIn already while we were talking. And yeah, she is quite active. So everybody should go out there and follow her. And I'll tell you, I don't know if you've ever heard that story. We had our CEO back at In Contact, then later Nice. He talked about the moonshot. And when JFK said, we're going to go to the moon. I don't know.
We're going to the moon, not because it's easy, but because it's hard.
Exactly. And it was hard. I mean, it is hard even today. If somebody, we haven't gone back for how many years, right? But it was a very audacious goal to set forth that we're going to do it by the end of that decade, I believe.
Yep.
It was supposed to be the end of the 60s or something like that. And what that meant is that every single person at NASA had to rally together, and they had one singular goal.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we talk about it in the context of what she was talking about, it's they were all telling the same story. We're going to get to the moon by the end of the decade. And so from the highest and smartest rocket scientist to the newest janitor, they all played a part in reaching one singular goal. They were singing from that same sheet of music like we were just talking about. And I mean, I really love that story. I love what she's talking about. And I can totally understand why that would bring people together in an organization. I loved it.
Yeah, and I love the fact that it's not just about telling your company's story, but really understanding your customer's story, right?
Yeah.
And making sure that those stories align. Like it's one thing, and we see this a lot in the contact center industry, Tom, like how many companies come out with the next shiny button, right? And they're just like, look at the shiny button. It's the shiniest button ever. And that's what they present as the value versus telling the story of how the shiny button helps solve a problem, or to Andrea's point, fits into that greater narrative. Like I kind of view what we're doing here at Sharpen as the Lord of the Rings story, right? Like we're on a quest to create contact centers that people love, or at least don't hate as much, right? Like that's a journey. That's a quest that we're taking. And I hope we get to Mordor one day, right? Now, will we ever get to Mordor? That's the question, because I mean, this is a never-ending goal. I think is like, how do you quantify love, right? And it's constantly getting better, but you're always going to want to get better. So it's in that pursuit of something greater. And if you as a company don't know your own story, how do you expect your customers to know your story? And Absolutely. If anything, it's putting them in a spot, they're going to make their own story for you. Like there's a certain cable provider, Tom, that I recently left. And boy, oh boy, I have my own narrative for them. And it's not so nice because I've been on hold like probably 3 or 4 hours collectively over the past few months. And that for me, that's the story I tell myself and I tell others when I talk about said cable provider. So tell your own story. And just to Andrea's point, I want to drive this home. If you're going to tell your story, do it. Like actually stick to your story. If you're going to make a promise, back it up. Like if you tell a story and then you don't follow through, goodbye, trust. Nobody's going to pay attention to you again. And then you're out to lunch.
Absolutely. And just for everybody's edification, does the cable provider that you left, does it rhyme with bomb fast?
Bomb fast infinity. So maybe.
That's so funny. Yeah, if I could leave them, I would. Unfortunately, it's the only thing available in my area, and they know it.
And that's the part that's frustrating. Like when I moved out here, I had another option, and that I was like, okay, we're going. But this other option got bought by T-Mobile, so we'll see. Fingers crossed.
Oh yeah. Well, okay. Well, best of luck to you. That was fun.
Yes, likewise. All right, I think we're gonna bring it home. Any final words for the audience this week, Tom?
No. Just a heads up to everybody. Brian and I are both going to be doing a ton of traveling over the next couple of months. We were going to work hard to make sure that we keep our cadence going. But if we miss a week or we're late in the afternoon or something, please forgive us.
Yes, please forgive us. We are only human, and that is our story. How about that for a wrap up, Tom? All right, we'll go ahead. We'll finish things here. This is Brian Nichols signing off here for Tom Milligan on another episode of CX Without the BS. We'll see you next week.